Hi, I'm Kelly Monaco. I'm currently unemployed, so I created this channel to earn some extra income. I'll be updating you with the latest news about the Drama General Hospital.
Britt's shock did not explode all at once. It settled into her like ice, cold enough to numb her before it began to burn. The truth about Rocco was not just horrifying because he had been the one to shoot Cullum. It was horrifying because of everything wrapped around that moment, everything that had happened afterward, everything Jason had chosen to do in silence. Jason had taken the blame for Rocco, stepped into the line of fire without hesitation, and turned himself into the shield standing between a terrified boy and a future that could have been destroyed in a single night. For Britt, that truth changed everything. It changed the meaning of the shooting, the meaning of Jason's choices, and the meaning of the danger still hanging over all of them. What had once looked like a violent incident buried beneath layers of confusion now felt like a living wound, one still bleeding beneath the surface, one that could split open again at any second. She could not stop seeing it in her mind. Rocco panicked, cornered by fear, pulling the trigger in a moment of desperation that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Cullum collapsing, chaos rushing in. Then Jason making the kind of decision only Jason could make, brutal and selfless at the same time, taking the crime onto his own shoulders before the truth could settle in anyone else's hands. That was what broke Britt open inside. Rocco was too young to carry something like this, without it poisoning every part of who he was becoming. Jason knew that, Britt knew that. The tragedy was not only that a boy had fired the gun. The deeper tragedy was that from that moment on, every adult who loved him had been forced into some version of a lie. Jason had accepted ruin, Britt had accepted silence, and now silence itself was becoming more dangerous than the original crime. Because Cullum was still alive, that fact changed the shape of the threat more than anything else. If he had died, the horror would have remained buried inside guilt, grief, and whatever private torment Rocco and Jason carried forward. But Cullum survived, and survival made him dangerous in a way death never could. Men like him did not wake up from blood and pain with clarity or peace. They woke up with rage. They woke up needing answers. They woke up needing revenge badly enough to tear open anyone standing near the truth. Britt understood that instinctively. It was not hard to imagine Cullum lying in recovery, piecing the night back together in fragments, replaying fear, humiliation, and violence until his instincts began to reject the convenient version of events. Jason's confession might satisfy the police or at least delay them, but it would not satisfy a man like Cullum. He would keep looking. He would keep testing every weakness in the story until he found the place where it cracked, and Britt feared that place was her. It was not because she was weak. In many ways, that was exactly why she was vulnerable. Britt felt too much and hid it too well. She had always survived by masking pain with sharpness, intelligence, and distance, but this was different. This was not ordinary fear. This was fear sharpened by protectiveness. The moment she fully understood what Jason had done for Rocco, something inside her shifted. Rocco stopped being only a troubled boy tangled in adult danger and became someone she felt she had to protect at any cost. That was what made the situation so catastrophic. Cullum was not merely a threat to her body or her peace of mind. He was a threat to the secret holding Rocco's future together. If he reached the truth, he would not just drag Rocco into scandal. He would drag him into shame, criminal exposure, and a lifetime of being defined by one terrible moment of fear. Britt could not bear that. The more she thought about it, the more impossible the truth felt. That was why Cullum did not need to come at her with obvious violence right away. He only needed to make her understand that he was searching. He only needed her to feel his attention settling on her. A glance held too long. A question that seemed too precise. A quiet suggestion that Jason's confession did not explain everything. Cullum was not the kind of man who would waste revenge on theatrics alone. He would want something slower, something more intimate. He would want to watch fear spread through her before he made his real move. He would want Britt to know that he suspected there was another hand behind the shooting, another frightened presence buried beneath Jason's sacrifice. He would not have to say Rocco's name. The horror of the situation was that Britt would hear it even if he never spoke it aloud. And once she realized that, her choices began to narrow in terrifying ways. Britt was smart enough to know how this kind of man worked. Cullum would not present himself as a monster first. He would come as a negotiator. He would frame his revenge as a deal, his cruelty as an opportunity, his suspicion as something that could still be redirected. He would make Britt believe that if she cooperated, if she gave him what he wanted, if she accepted certain conditions, then perhaps Rocco could remain untouched. That was the ugliest possibility of all, not because it was surprising, but because it was plausible. Britt could already imagine him speaking to her in that cold, controlled way predators often do, offering mercy not as kindness but as leverage. He would not ask her to protect herself. He would ask her to prove how far she was willing to go to protect someone else. That was the moment Britt began to understand how easily love could become a trap. She hated herself for even imagining an agreement with him. Every instinct warned her that a bargain with Cullum would be poison. He would not keep his word, because honor meant nothing to him. He would not stop once he had power over her, because power was the point. Any deal he offered would only be another weapon, a way to drag her deeper into fear and obedience. Yet the more she thought about Rocco, the less impossible the idea became. She was no longer measuring decisions by morality, she was measuring them by damage. Which choice would destroy Rocco the least? Which choice would buy him more time? Which choice would keep the truth buried just a little longer? In that kind of thinking, terrible decisions begin to feel reasonable. A lie becomes necessary. A compromise becomes temporary. A private meeting with an enemy begins to look like sacrifice instead of surrender. That was how Britt started slipping toward a madness she would never have accepted under any other circumstances. Not a loud, chaotic madness, but a quiet one. The kind that arrives when someone decides her own safety matters less than the life she is trying to protect. Britt was not choosing selfishness. That was the tragedy. She was choosing self-erasure. She was beginning to believe that if taking on danger herself would keep Rocco from being swallowed by the truth, then danger was a fair price. If Jason had already destroyed his own peace to save that boy, how could she justify doing less? That question poisoned everything. It made recklessness feel noble. It made self-destruction feel necessary. It made Cullum's possible deal feel less like corruption and more like duty. Jason's role in all of this haunted her relentlessly. His confession was supposed to protect Rocco, but in another sense, it had also trapped everyone else. Jason had moved the weight, not removed it. He had shifted the blast radius away from Rocco, but now the explosion was building in slower, quieter ways around the people left holding the secret. Britt understood that with painful clarity. Jason had acted the only way he knew how, by becoming the wall between innocence and consequence. But walls crack under pressure, and Britt could already feel the pressure growing. The longer Jason carried the lie, the more fragile it became. The more Cullum searched, the more exposed Britt became. And the more exposed Britt became, the more likely she was to make a desperate choice that would ruin her completely. What made her suffering even crueler was that she had to carry it invisibly. She could not openly grieve for Jason because that grief would raise questions. She could not openly protect Rocco because that protectiveness would mean too much. She could not tell anyone how terrified she had become without risking the secret itself. So she was forced into performance, calm voice, Measured expression, controlled steps. Meanwhile, everything inside her was growing more unstable by the day. That kind of pressure changes people. It strips away their softer instincts and leaves only function. Britt began to think less about who she was and more about what she had to do next. Survival became strategic, emotion became dangerous, truth became a luxury she could no longer afford. That was when Cullum became most frightening, not as a man with a gun or a vendetta, but as a man who might understand exactly how cornered she was. He would see the tension in her, the silence, the unnatural restraint. He would recognize someone already living under the burden of a secret too heavy to survive cleanly. And if he truly suspected Jason had taken the blame for someone else, then Britt was the perfect person to target. Jason would endure pain in silence. Rocco would be hidden and shielded. But Britt stood in the middle, emotionally exposed, morally trapped, and frightened enough to do something reckless. Cullum could use that. He could pressure her into becoming his source, his accomplice, or his hostage long before he ever needed proof. The most terrifying possibility was that Britt might agree to it, not because she trusted him, not because she was foolish, but because once a person starts choosing between two forms of devastation, she can be manipulated by whichever one looks slower. Britt could already feel that logic taking hold. If one meeting with Cullum could keep Rocco safe for another week, she would consider it. If one lie told on Jason's behalf could hold the secret together longer, she would tell it. If putting herself in danger could keep a child from being exposed as the shooter, then danger would stop mattering. That was the point where protection became obsession. Britt was not simply helping anymore. She was willing to become the cost. And in Port Charles, becoming the cost often means becoming the victim. If Cullum wanted revenge through Britt, he would not necessarily rush to kill her. That was what made the threat so insidious. He might prefer to break her first, to isolate her, to make her complicit in her own destruction. He could blackmail her, summon her into private arrangements, force her to betray pieces of herself one decision at a time until she no longer recognized the woman staring back in the mirror. He could let her believe she was saving Rocco even as he tightened control around her. He could make her understand with exquisite cruelty that every step she took to protect the boy only placed her deeper inside his reach. That kind of revenge would satisfy a man like Cullum far more than one act of violence ever could. It would not only punish Britt, it would poison Jason's sacrifice and turn Rocco's secret into a machine that destroyed everyone around it. Still, the possibility of death was real, and Britt knew it. If Cullum decided that fear was no longer enough, if he decided that using Britt as pressure was more effective than bargaining with her, then she could become the next body in this chain of consequences. That truth did not shock her as much as it should have. In some dark corner of her heart, she had already begun to accept it. Not because she wanted to die, but because she was starting to believe that dying might be easier than betraying Rocco. That was the most tragic shift of all. Fear had changed shape inside her. It was no longer simply fear of Cullum. It was fear of being the one who failed the boy Jason had tried to save. So Britt moved forward with a calm that looked almost unnatural from the outside. She would think harder, move faster, hide better. She would make whatever choice she had to make. She would step into ugliness if it kept the truth off Rocco's name. She would carry Jason's sacrifice for as long as she could. And if Cullum forced her into a bargain, she might take it, even knowing that bargains with men like him only lead to ruin. That was how far she had already fallen. Not into evil, but into the desperate, distorted logic of someone who believes love must be proven through suffering. In the end, that may be what destroys her. Not the secret alone, not Cullum alone. But the collision between love, fear, guilt, and sacrifice. Rocco's crime is hidden, Jason's confession is holding back the storm, and Britt is standing in the center of it all, trying to keep the sky from splitting open. But storms in Port Charles do not stay contained forever. Cullum's suspicion will grow, his revenge will sharpen. And if he chooses Britt as the path to what he wants, then she may soon discover that protecting Rocco does not only mean risking her life, it may mean walking knowingly toward death because she can no longer bear any other outcome.
I'll be back at the General Hospital soon. We'll see each other again soon. Thank you for supporting my channel. Goodbye and see you again.